A colleague of mine told me that he was once talking with a group of 3- and 4-year-olds, the preschool kids, in his synagogue, and he was talking to them about Passover. He wanted the children to understand in a way that would make sense to them, and he said to this group of 3- and 4-year-olds, "We used to be slaves, and now we are free." And one little kid raised his hand and said, "Actually, I'm free and a half." One of the highlights of the week for Chazan Shamash and for me is to work with our preschool, with Rachel Mathlis, our director, and the wonderful teachers. And we sing songs with them and we dance with them, and it's just remarkable. And what you see when you watch 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds is that they are not yet self-conscious. So they sing out. And boys and girls hold each other's hands and they dance. And there was one little boy who just yesterday was sort of doing this fun little dance motion, and it was just so precious and so cute. And you take a step back and you realize that as these kids get older, they're going to become more self-conscious. They're going to become very aware of what they look like and very aware of what they can say and what they can't say and how loud they can sing and what they can do all together. And obviously, as adults, that continues. The sense of the pressures that we get from what we believe it's okay for us to do, not okay for us to do, okay for us to choose, not okay for us to choose. And it can become, over time, a little bit frustrating and maybe a little bit tiring and maybe a little bit depleting. And I want to talk about what it really means for us to have cherut, for us to have the kind of freedom that allows us on occasion to do what we believe is right, to put forth what we believe makes sense for us in ways that, of course, are responsible, but maybe not so beholden to the whole web of expectations that we see around us. In a few weeks, my colleagues on Old Mill, Rabbis Tara and Meir Feldman and Rabbi Dale Polikoff, are going to have our annual rabbinic dialogue conversation. And we get together. It's always fun for us to meet and to plan what are we going to talk about. And we decided that what we wanted to talk about this year are the pressures that come from living in our community. It's no secret that our community has its pressures. It's no secret that many of us feel, to some degree, constrained by the spoken and unspoken pressures that are all around us. Pressures that may have to do with our professional choices or our personal choices or how we look or how we celebrate. There is a web of pressure that impacts us all of the time. And it can be depleting, and it can be exhausting. We celebrated Pesach. Pesach is Zman Cherutenu. It is the time of our freedom. What does that mean? Are we free to make the kinds of choices that, again, aren't hurting anybody, but are choices that reflect who we are as individuals and what we want to put forth into the world? And if we don't feel free, what's stopping us, and how can we get to a place where we are making healthy choices that affirm who we are and that, I believe, ultimately have a deeper and richer impact on our families and on our community? French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote at the beginning of The Social Contract, which was his analysis of how human beings relate to each other. He wrote, "L'homme est né libre, mais partout il se trouve dans les fers." We are born free, but ultimately we find ourselves in chains. There are so many things that imprison us. Sometimes the chains are visible, sometimes they're not visible, but they are no less powerful. So what I'd like to do for the next few moments is to share a reflection about an interpretation of a certain part of our Torah portion this morning, and then to leave us with some questions that I would like us to feel free to ask ourselves today and over time. So first, the Torah portion. So the portion describes how the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, and achieve atonement for himself and for his family, the other Kohanim, and then for Kol Beit Yisrael, the entire household of Israel. Yishai Ribo is a famous Israeli singer, and he created and wrote a song that weaves the Torah portion with a number of interesting midrashim interpretations. The song is called Seder HaAvodah, the service of the Kohen entering and asking for forgiveness. And it describes how the Kohen would go through phases. So first, the Kohen would walk to the Kodesh HaKodeshim wearing Bigdei HaChol, wearing his weekday garments, his ordinary garments. And then he would enter and he would change into Bigdei Lavan, into white garments, and he would ask for forgiveness. And then he would change into Bigdei Zahav, into gold garments, and he would express gratitude for the blessings in his life. And then he would leave, and then finally he changed into what Ribo sings as Bigdei Atzmo, which means the clothing of himself, the clothing of his essence. It's not just Bigdei HaChol, it's not just what he started out in. He's actually dressed differently. It's his own clothing. And I want us to think about that. What does it mean for us to pass through community, to pass through the white clothing, the gold clothing, but to do it in a way that ultimately clarifies for us what our own clothing should be, Bigdei Atzmeinu. Who are we, and what do we want to bring to our family and to our friends and to our community? If we believe that we are being unfairly impacted by the expectations around us to the point where we no longer feel like we are authentically ourselves, like we are wearing Bigdei Atzmeinu, then this Torah portion and the interpretation of it invite us to reflect. What are Bigdei Atzmeinu? What are we looking to do in various realms that reflect who we are and that can ultimately have the more authentic and lasting and transformative impact on our community? Do we have the insight and the inner strength to differentiate between the expectations that are healthy and the expectations that are not so healthy, between the expectations that cut to our integrity as human beings and the expectations that are more superficial than that? What are the white and the gold garments that help us to determine what our own day-to-day garments should be? What are Bigdei Atzmeinu, our essential garments? How can we wear them when we are alone, and even more so when we are with one another? Shabbat Shalom.